Hey, how are you? Kumusta po kayo? And thanks for tuning in to another edition of Paul Presents Art. My name is Paul and I'll be your guide today. Today we're just outside the Contemporary Art Gallery here in Yaletown in Vancouver, which is of course built on the ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And today we're going to go inside the gallery to have a look at a suite of mixed media paintings by Sojourner Truth Parsons. So we're going to go inside the gallery. I hope you can join me for the tour, and let's do it! Just showing you a glimpse of the street as we enter the gallery. Sojourner Truth Parsons' work occupies the larger of two exhibition spaces and comprises 10 works. As is customary in my videos, I tend to do an initial pan of the exhibition. Then later, we'll have a closer look at each work where I'll share some commentary based on my research, share my impressions, and what I remember from the curator's tour that I attended a few days ago. For now, let me share a short bio on the artist. For more than 10 years now, the paintings of Sojourner Truth Parsons have trafficked in the saturated and sensorial. Plumbing the space between abstraction and legibility, feeling and form, the language of Parsons' work is an intuitive one. Building depth through accretion, collapsing interior and exterior realms, and traversing a shifting set of references, from the history of dance to the G-bend quilts of Alabama to her garden in the Catskill Mountains, her paintings give shape to intensities, both atmospheric and embodied. This first work is titled Green Girl, 2021, acrylic on canvas, linen, archival adhesive. If you're new to the channel, please know that this channel is about art, exhibitions in contemporary, historical, and outsider art, group shows, art collections, etc. I live in Vancouver, Canada, so most of my videos will be based in that region, but I'll cover exhibitions as I travel. The title of the show, Louise, is in reference to the work of poet Louise Glück, known for her decades-long meditation on the illusions and agonies of the self. The exhibition traces the enduring emotional registers, both individual and collective, that occupy Parsons' time in the studio: desire, loss, isolation, redemption, resurgence. Zooming in closer, you'll notice in this work, and with others in the show, some bits of linen glued on top of the painted canvas. I love how it creates three-dimensional shadows, as the edges of the glued linen peels off slightly. As I mentioned earlier, I was fortunate enough to attend the curator's tour a few days ago, so I'll be quoting some of what was said during that tour. I took copious notes. This work we're looking at is titled February 2021. Acrylic on canvas, linen, archival adhesive. The curator was talking about this particular work and others that have similar treatment, that date from the same period. Here's what the curator had to say, and I quote, "Parsons came to painting later in her career. When she was just coming out of NSCAD, or Nova Scotia College of Art and Design in Halifax, she was mostly working on paper, mostly working in collage. And when I say collage, we often think of cutting up a magazine and assembling them together. But that's not at all what she was working with. She was working with a variety of papers, which she would soak, she would dye, she would turn them into a variety of textures. It would no longer look like paper, and she would assemble images that way. We still see the collage impulse, and there are a few of them in the show that are physically collaged, and all of the works are still really rooted in the collage impulse, even the ones that have a seemingly flat surface." End quote. I'll continue that train of thought a bit later as we look at this next series of work titled Excerpts from End of April, Beginning of May 2023, acrylic on canvas, 15 panels, but 6 are on view. From afar, this work seems monochromatic, like an Ad Reinhardt abstract painting, evoking a spiritual quality to the experience of viewing. But after a few seconds of maneuvering around the paintings, and viewing from many angles, our eyes adjust to the subtleties of the subject matter. It becomes clear that another color is involved, but yet unclear as to what we're looking at. But the essence of the series can be arrived at through the title, End of April and Beginning of May, which coincides with the annual mating of frogs called amplexus. Apparently, it happens once a year, and on one fateful spring night, while Parsons was taking a stroll in the forest, she witnessed this amphibious orgasmic event, purely by chance. and these paintings try to relive that moment. That feeling of seeing and not seeing, knowing and not knowing, but sensing, is evoked throughout the panels. And on one panel, perhaps more, you'll see the shadow of frogs leaping excitedly. Now we move on to Red Goes Away, Yellow Goes Away, Blue Goes Away, 2021, acrylic on canvas, linen, archival adhesive. Continuing with the curator's quote, here's more of what he had to say. In these earlier works, we see Parsons painting some of the images, developing it directly on the surface of the canvas, and there are elements which she has cut out of the canvas and linen, painted and then moving it around the canvas. There's often many more elements than this that make their way off and on the canvas during the image making process. These are entirely improvisational. There's no sketching, she has no idea what an image will look like when she begins. Canvases start out blank, and she usually starts by building geometric forms on them, and eventually they begin migrating in one direction or another, and she follows it. There's no idea in her mind of what something will look like, and so these elements are being part of that process for her for many years, having these elements which she can physically move around the canvas, because it's much easier to do that. It's how her brain works, than to paint something and paint it over. End quote. The methodology the curator shared made a lot of sense to me. When I first encountered the works, the edges of the shapes looked unpainterly, or lacking a painterly hand, like they were cut out using scissors. Concurrently, I was also thinking of Henri Matisse and his collages, which I'll discuss a bit later. Moving right along is this work, titled Drinking Alone 1, 2023, acrylic on canvas. The exhibition also comes with a brochure that explores some of the paintings and their influences. For this piece and others that have cityscapes, the brochure had this to say, and I quote, "Since relocating to New York several years ago, the cityscape has been a recurrent touchstone in Parsons' works, with the artist layering towering forms against the midnight sky. Nodding to the city's structures and rhythms, the fullness of its promise, and potency of its perils, Parsons' take on the city is both illusory and fragmentary, anchored in her mind's eye as readily as the built environment. The moon often punctuates these compositions, a transportive force, one that she uses to evoke a range of energies, desire, fantasy, introspection, change," end quote. The moon is a recurring theme in her work, for fantasizing, for being moonstruck, but perhaps as a reference to change, and how that change registers within her durational paintings. I mentioned durational as a reference to density and how time is condensed in her paintings. For this particular piece, I think it's worth noting Parsons' engagement with both the city and the rural life, and how they condense into a unified experience. While the cityscape is echoed through the tall vertical blocks of color, there is a stack of Pac-Man-like shapes in the middle left that seem to reference stacked firewood, perhaps a winter supply for her home in the southern Catskill Mountains. It's a distillation of two realities that at some point merges into one coherent reality, which in my opinion achieves the density of experiences over a period of time. This next work is titled After, 2024, acrylic on canvas, which to me exhibits a similar sensibility to the earlier 15-part piece, evoking a retinal quality. Twilight, dawn, or dusk have similar retinal qualities. It is a time for change, where one period ends and another begins. And appropriately, this work titled After simply ushers in what comes next, and the anticipation at what may be revealed. It's also worth noting that while the influence of collage may have physically disappeared from these later and more painterly paintings, the strategies and essence of collage remain, through the shapes used, and the act of layering the paint in order to create a visible and barely discernible palimpsest of actions and experiences witnessed by time, duration, and repetitive movement. Now we get to July 3, 2020-2021, acrylic on canvas. The brochure for the exhibition describes this work as such, and I quote, "Titled after the Nina Simone song of the same name, Parsons images two women in silhouette, a fixture of her recent work, one that casts the body as both energy and form, unknowable and elusive. The figure on the left gazes across a canvas as the other extends beyond the work's frame, standing on point. As with many of Parsons' works, July Tree reflects on the intensities produced by a change in state, here between two people navigating the early throes of desire, unquote. During the tour, I recall the curator talking about the silhouette of the body as representing energy or form, but also, as I discovered later, is a representation of race and how each of us chooses to discern or define that. In her paintings, we discern edges as a nuance, referring to a flatness next to a color, next to a texture, which may also describe her ethnicity as an edge, being part black, indigenous, and settler colonial. The figurative shapes are mostly painted in dark tones, referencing a part of her ancestry, but in addition conjures up the essence of twilight or the shadow as liminal transitional spaces. As Parsons experiences the world around her, she finds that it's full of edges and nuances that we each try to understand and navigate. Next we have one of the more recent works, titled Alone Together, Together Alone, 2024 acrylic on canvas, which on the outset seems to reference intimacy or a desire for connection. The minimal color palette, tonality, and shapes suggest anonymity in a private setting. For me, this composition and others like it recall the title of the show, Louise, dedicated to writer and poet Louise Glück, who wrote about the agonies and illusions of the self, the impossibility of being alive, and understanding how to exist in the world. With regard to Parsons and her references to collage, I had mentioned Henri Matisse earlier as a painter who resorted to collage after an illness prevented him from physically painting. For Parsons, however, it was the reverse, whereby collage allowed her the facility and mechanism to experiment and engage with her compositions. But while paint can exude bright colors, paper often seems flat and toned down in comparison, neither vibrant nor flamboyant, which to me effectively caters to the shadowy, liminal spaces that Parsons' paintings inhabit. And this work is titled Dark Bluebell 6, 2024 acrylic on canvas, and I'd like to briefly share a few notes from the curator's tour, which I believe describe this work and others like it, and I quote, Parsons' work oscillates between the figurative and the abstract, neither settling into either register with any real clarity. At the heart of it, there is a collapsing between an interior reality and exterior reality. She's very concerned with a way of seeing the world that distills the energy, the sensation, the texture of the moment, or place, or an experience into visual form. Sometimes the representational, or the figurative, helps her get there. But really at the core of her work is a desire to look at the sensorial, or the way something feels. She doesn't really expect us to read a narrative from them. End quote. And that's a really good point to make about our narrative expectations from art. It's like expecting written text to mean something rather than appreciating the shapes and textures of the letters themselves, or the metaphor or symbolism that words represent rather than their literal meaning. But to be human is to find meaning in the stories that we choose to tell, and Parsons' paintings do tell us something about ourselves. We are getting to the end of the exhibition. This last work is rather different from the rest, and the most recent work in the show, and is titled The Beginning of the End of the Garden, 2025, acrylic on canvas. The brochure describes this work as follows. For more than 10 years now, Parsons has maintained a thread of her practice that functions largely as a study of light. While living in Los Angeles, these were large-scale abstractions, favoring the pinks, purples, and oranges of Southern California's dawn and dusk. Upon moving to New York, she turned her attention to the ways moonlight reflects across the surface of the city. In recent years, she has produced a series of loose, rectilinear arrangements that trace the movement of light across her garden in upstate New York. Built up through an intuitive process of layering paint, shifting color and texture through successive washes of pigment and finish, these canvases meditate on the way light absorbs, illuminates, reflects, and transforms. End quote. And I believe that's a good place to leave things. I hope you enjoyed this tour of Sojourner Truth Parsons' exhibition of paintings here at the Contemporary Art Gallery. I wish to thank Executive Director Matthew Hyland for his insights into the work. If you'd like to share your thoughts, observations, questions, please do so in the comment section below. That would be great. Click the like button and be sure to subscribe to the channel. It's free, and as a non-monetized channel, subscribing achieves visibility and creates added awareness on the artist and the gallery. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Thank you for joining me today. Have a great day, and I hope art continues to inform your life. Tune in again next time for more art-related videos. Goodbye!